The extended synthesis is the name for a whole range of new proposals that have been made by leading evolutionary biologists who, on the one hand, recognize that neo-Darwinism is inadequate, that the mutation natural selection mechanism does not generate new form and new biological information. And on the other, biologists who want to hold on to a strictly materialistic or naturalistic approach to solving the problem. So they're proposing other materialistic evolutionary mechanisms to try to supplement the perceived and increasingly agreed limitations or liabilities of the mutation selection mechanism. So the extended synthesis the terminology is based on, it's a variation on the old idea that neo-Darwinism was a synthesis of Mendelian genetics and classical Darwinian theory. And that in the 1930s and 40s was called the new synthesis. So the extended synthesis is new evolutionary mechanisms that are being kind of bolted on to the old neo-Darwinian theory. In our book, we have a whole chapter on these proposals. And we show that some of the proposals are really quite interesting, and that they definitely describe biological mechanisms that neo-Darwinism has given to which neo-Darwinism has given short shrift. They're not things that the Darwinists talk about much. But the problem we've found with each of these new proposals is that they don't account for the origin of the information necessary to build new forms of life either. And typically they end up either not addressing the problem of biological information, or they simply or they will end up begging the question. They'll explain the origin of new form by presupposing pre-existing unexplained sources of information. Let me give you an example. There's a brilliant scientist at the University of Chicago named James Shapiro. He gave one of the best talks at the conference in November of 2016 at the Royal Society in London. He has a new model he calls natural genetic engineering. And what he points out is that the mutations that we see taking place in nature very often are not random at all. They're not random with respect to the survival needs of the organism. Rather, they are in some way produced by guided mechanisms that reflect a kind of pre-programmed adaptive capacity. So if an organism is under some sort of environmental stress, that triggers a response that either expresses some pre-existing genetic information or ramps up mutational processes in certain designated parts of the genome. And these are not random responses at all. They're under what he calls algorithmic control. So you have a pre-programmed adaptive response to an environmental stress that produces a change, an evolutionary change that allows the organism to survive under certain conditions. Very cool, very interesting biology. But there's a big question that Shapiro doesn't address, and that is, where does the pre-programming come from? Because that original pre-programming implies that there's an informational endowment. An algorithm is a computer program. So there's information already in the cell that's telling the cell how to respond to these environmental stressors. And what we want to know is, where does that information come from? Shapiro doesn't answer that question. Therefore, his model, as interesting as it is, as accurate as it is in describing some biological processes that have been overlooked, does not answer the ultimate origins question, particularly the question of the origin of information. And each of the models in the new synthesis, or the new mechanisms in the new synthesis, have that kind of a problem. They describe interesting biology, but presuppose the origin of the information necessary for those processes to occur.